Let's watch a couple clips of a recent Hasan Piker speech at Cambridge University, where I know I typically try to stray away from covering other creators and, just what they're doing specifically, but I do ideologically agree with Hasan a lot, and the speech is rather inspiring in my opinion, so I thought we could take a look at some of the best moments and add some additional context to what he was trying to say.
I stand before you following the footsteps of intellectual giants as nothing but a simple man who understands right from wrong, and sometimes that's all that matters. In the words of my friend, the late great Michael Jamal Brooks, there's nothing complicated about apartheid. The morality of it is clear. If the roles were reversed and a captive Jewish population of 5 million people were being systematically starved, sieged, and dominated, everyone would understand what's going on. Its ancestral lands being destroyed, everyone would understand what's going on. So in his words, it's not a complex issue. It's super simple. It's the most powerful country in the Middle East. It's backed by the United States, the most powerful country on the planet, and it acts on another population of people with total impunity and is never held accountable for anything. Well, I guess some things are changing in that regard, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But there is no symmetry in this relationship, period. That's what Michael Jamal Brooks said. So I see no need for obfuscation, no arguments for complexity, no reasoning for preemptive genocide. Israel is an apartheid state, and its inception was a violent one with the forced displacement of 700,000.
Exactly, and Michael Brooks was another gem in the spear, may he rest in peace, who was spot on when he said that. Apartheid is wrong, it's evil, there's nothing complex about that. Like, it should be simple and easy for anyone to say that, and when something is wrong, it's wrong then. There's no qualifier that makes the wrong thing right. I think the death penalty is wrong. It doesn't matter if you smoked weed or shot my grandmother, I still think the death penalty is wrong, and I can confidently say the same for apartheid. There's nothing that's going to make me be like, well, maybe they deserved apartheid, but because it's the country that's doing it is one we vehemently back. It's like, as America and American media, we have to try and both sides the apartheid and justify why the Palestinians kind of deserve it. Like, yeah, maybe Israel's going too far, but Palestinians kind of deserve it to me. And to me, it's like, no, it's simple, right? It's the most powerful country in the region, backed by the most powerful country in the world with billions of dollars and advanced weaponry behind them, pushing their boot down on the neck of a poorer, smaller region, and nothing that region could do would possibly justify this. And as Hasan said, I think if the tables were turned, we would see the outcry that we should be seeing now. If this was Jews in Israel being killed, being displaced, being whatever it may be, the world would literally stand still. But because it's Arabs who the world has relegated to the bottom barrel in their mind, it's like, is it really that bad? With some countries defending it, others coming out against it. And again, we're getting this where we're like both siding a genocide. Like, yes, it's wrong, it's evil, and it's not complex. This should be simple for people to say.
Platforms like Twitter routinely surface the worst of the worst kinds of content, but the most divisive, most hateful content. But Elon Musk is not the only person responsible for this. And I hate Elon Musk, okay? I hate Elon Musk as much as you guys hate Oxford College. I heard that if I say that, I'll get some applause breaks there. So that was my exit ramp. But it's not just Elon Musk, it's not just Twitter. It's happening all around. Young people, men in particular, who don't have much education or literacy skills with no hopeful prospects of the future are being propagandized by waves of right-wing influencers who have never had megaphones this loud. Although this issue most often gets brought up in the context of the 2024 election and Donald Trump, there's more to this. I think it's important to connect it to Palestine as well. These are forces who want to normalize the current levels of violence and to convince people that actually it's good to be this bloodthirsty. While it was Joe Biden who gave Israel the blank check with which to commit a genocide, that decision has created an entire galaxy of right-wingers who are actually in position to cash it. And cash it they are currently. If you've seen the Donald Trump cabinet picks, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
And this was also a great point, I thought. A great great way to connect it to the very relatable way that everyone sees this sort of radicalization and brainwashing right before our eyes happen, which is through our election and domestic politics with MAGA and Trump, you know, the misinformation machine we talk about and things like that. But to connect that to how, hey, it's also happening on a larger scale on both sides with things that are happening abroad. Things like Israel, Palestine in this specific context, where people who prior to this election cycle probably had never heard of the conflict. And of course, you know, admitting you don't know enough about something or like weren't read up on it before it became a trend is like forbidden nowadays. Nobody will ever do that. So they're just going to pretend they do know about it. Or people who even now don't really care about the conflict, but, you know, want to be able to talk about the trends when they're trending, or they, you know, they don't keep up with the news on it. They're not actually reading about what's happening or seeing from the journalists on the ground. These people are taking a side. This is what we're seeing. They're taking it aside, and it's a pro-genocide, pro-apartheid side, despite them maybe not even knowing that's what they're defending or what's actually happening. And it's because they've been radicalized to believe that this is actually good on a very superficial level, right? Where, oh, it's the Arabs deserved it. You know, they're terrorists and the Jews went through the Holocaust. So they're clearly the victims. And it's this tool that is used by the elites to ready the flock for what's to come, so to speak, right? Where now Trump has the most hawkish cabinet we've seen in a long time, with people who have openly said to level Gaza, to invade Iran, to reinvade Afghanistan, like people who have been pushing for war their entire careers, like Marco Rubio, Mike Huckabee, Mike Waltz. Like, I don't think people understand what it is that Trump is building out a cabinet to do. And these things get normalized by, oh, we're fighting terrorism because, of course, you know, Arabs are terrorists. So if we're attacking them, that's why. When a lot of the time, when you look into things, it's us or our allies that are carrying out the true acts of terror.
It seems right now that those people who genuinely desire for a better future, who want an alternative to the genocide, will have to start looking amongst themselves, looking within themselves, their friends, and away from the mainstream if they want to help bring something like justice into the world. So I stand before you as a man who simply wants some semblance of justice for the Palestinians. I urge you not to lean into nihilism and succumb to helplessness, because you do not need the academic pedigree to know right from wrong. All you need is your moral compass. As someone who has seen the Palestine question evolve over my past 10 years of public advocacy, I never would have imagined international organs demand legal restitution from America's most valuable asset. After all, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Thank you.
And him ending with the Lenin quote is just, mwah. I mean, this is one of my favorite quotes, truly. But yes, now, I mean, look, before we get into this, I'm not as lefty-pilled or as far gone as some lefties are on this issue. I don't think America is some inherent villain that needs to be destroyed because of this or whatever. I think that, you know, the liberal democracy, the American experiment that is a liberal democracy, is probably something that should be preserved at all costs, right? And like, you know, so I'm not going to go into these like low-key pro-Russia talking points when we divulge into this, but I do think that understanding the wrongs that America has created, has exacerbated, and has carried out, a lot of it being the product of the almost inherent corruption or evil that is built into power imbalances, especially, at least, where we've adopted this imperialist mindset to keep the power, to keep this power in balance also, kind of, which is, of course, going to lead to us being the bad guy in some fairy tales, which I think the goal should be to always minimize these occurrences to where we are the bad guy and stick to being the world force that prevents other big nations from imposing themselves on smaller ones, like we are doing currently with Russia and Ukraine. And I think that's just America protecting the small guy from the bully, just Ukraine defending Ukraine from Russia. America helping the bully crush the small guy, not just us backing Israel against Palestine. And I think part of understanding this and holding ourselves accountable the way that we should be, right? Like any good teammates holds their teammates accountable. So any good member of a country should be holding their countries accountable. I don't think it's like anti-American speak to say like, hey, we should be holding ourselves accountable so we can do better. A big part of that is understanding that in history, the victors will always write themselves as the good guys. And through this, you can understand why mainstream American media might not be the best outlet to learn about what America is doing abroad and in our conflicts. Now, I'm not saying obviously you can't trust media for anything. That's more of like the right-wing position. I'm also not saying, go find some Russian-funded media because it's not American, and then you can believe that. And then even with like independent media, you have to vet it because you never know who's getting funded from where, like Tim Pool literally just getting funded from Russia anyway, or you never know what kind of personal bias is changing the person's talking points. Maybe they're just personally pro-Russia and are spewing pro-Russian talking points for free, right? So if you're watching a source, one good red flag or checkpoint you could have, right, is if you're watching a source that isn't telling you that over 40,000 dead in a year, the overwhelming majority of those being civilians, around 2% of the population potentially being killed already, 70 to 80% of the territory in the region being destroyed, millions of this population being displaced, disease running rampant, the majority of the population being food insecure, starvation numbers growing, dealing with PTSD, culturally significant grounds and buildings being destroyed, of which you can never replace the history from them, 70% of the dead being women and children at least. If you're watching a source that isn't telling you like, hey, this is wrong, right? Like, this is sick. It's vile. It's maybe one of the most horrendous attacks we've ever seen on a culture or kind of people, at least in our lifetime. It definitely is. Then I can assure you that source that you're watching is one that you probably can't trust to credibly report on many things where America is at the helm of doing them.